Ex-prisoners. Did you ever meet an inmate who was nice, but you later realized committed a very serious crime? Yes, I met a really nice guy that was serving 2 life sentences. It was really hard for me to wrap my head around the idea, so I asked him about it. The guy was a Vietnam War vet. He was a tunnel rat, meaning that sometimes he had to belly crawl into holes to clear them with just the use of his boot knife. He got very efficient at it during his tour. Meanwhile, his tour was almost up and he was looking forward to coming home. However, he kept hearing stories about his sister being in an abusive relationship. He explained that normally he didn't involve himself in the details of other people's relationships, but this was his sister that he was very protective of, and he just didn't know how much he could tolerate knowing that she was in an abusive relationship after he'd spent years killing people just because they were the enemy. So he sent her a letter to break off that relationship in hopes he would never meet the guy that was abusing his sister. Eventually, he did return to the United States. He caught a cab from the airport to drive him home. But as they entered the neighborhood, the police had everything sealed off because of some crime scene investigation. He didn't want to step on anyone's toes. But he did explain that he was just returning home from Vietnam and only wanted to get home, which was only a block away. So they asked for his address, and he gave it, only to be met by a detective requesting his company down at the station. So he reiterated that he literally just returned from Vietnam and didn't know anything about what was going on. But the police insisted. So he goes down to the station to be informed that his sister and mother were killed by his sister's boyfriend. Apparently, the guy wasn't so keen about breaking off the relationship. The police had the guy. It was pretty cut and dry. He was in custody, and the police only asked him to let them do their job without him interfering. Well, turns out that the boyfriend bonded out, and this Vietnam vet had friends that knew where this guy hung out. So this guy goes down to a bar the boyfriend frequented and had him pointed out. He approached the guy at the pool table and started chatting the guy up. He explained that he just got back from Vietnam and that he was a tunnel rat there. He pulled out his combat knife to explain what it was like belly crawling through tunnels with that particular knife because his .45 would have alarmed the enemy. He told stories of spiders the size of basketballs rushing at him that he had to kill without giving away his position. But the guy he was talking to just wanted to know if he wanted a bet on the pool game. So he told the guy, his sister's abusive boyfriend that killed both his sister and his mother, that he had a bet for him. He told him that he was going to take that very same knife he used in Vietnam to skin him alive, and that he was willing to bet nobody in the bar would intervene. And so he did. And he didn't stop cutting up that guy in front of everyone until the police arrived and asked him to. When he went to court, the judge wasn't too happy about his vigilante justice and convicted him for murder. But when he was asked if he'd like to say anything before sentencing, he asked for the name of the magistrate officer that gave his sister and mother's murder bid. The life sentence he received wasn't just for the brutal murder of the man who had killed his mother and sister. If it had been only that, maybe there would have been room for a lesser charge, some argument that he had acted in a fit of rage, that grief had clouded his judgment. But that wasn't the real reason why he would never see freedom again. What truly sealed his fate were the words he spoke in the courtroom, right in front of the judge who was about to sentence him. At that moment, he didn't seem like a remorseful man, nor someone who had acted without full awareness. He locked eyes with the magistrate and asked, with an unsettling calmness, "What's the name of the judge who granted bail to the man who murdered my sister and my mother?" The courtroom fell silent. No one had expected that question. The judge hesitated for a moment, but kept his firm posture. He tried to brush off the provocation and move forward with the proceedings, but something about the way the Vietnam veteran stared at him sent a chill down everyone's spine. He didn't yell. He didn't lose control. He simply repeated the question, this time more firmly. "I just want a name. Who was responsible for letting that bastard walk free?" The attorneys whispered among themselves. The jury members exchanged tense glances. Everyone knew what he wanted, and they knew he wasn't bluffing. Ignoring that warning was a mistake. After sentencing, he was taken straight to prison without delay. The justice system wanted to close this case as quickly as possible. A veteran who had killed on the battlefield and then carried out his own form of justice in his homeland wasn't the kind of defendant courts liked dealing with. He didn't beg for mercy, didn't try to convince anyone of his innocence. He accepted his sentence without resistance, but not without leaving his mark. On the way to the penitentiary, as the guards escorted him, he remained silent. He didn't ask where they were taking him, didn't ask about his cell, didn't ask about his sentence. He already knew he wouldn't be leaving, but there was still something he needed to do. His connections hadn't vanished. He might have been taken off the streets, but the streets were still out there. Old war comrades, people who owed him favors, men who still had loyalty to him. He had learned something in Vietnam. When a target needs to be eliminated, you don't have to pull the trigger yourself. It started as a whisper inside the prison. The name of the judge who had granted bail to the man who killed his family. He found out. He found out because, even behind bars, he knew exactly how to get information. He was patient, calculating, waiting for the right moment. Outside, the pieces began to move. It didn't take long before the magistrates started receiving strange phone calls. Letters with no return address. Small signs that something was off. At first, he tried to ignore it. Then, he started growing paranoid. Security at the courthouse was reinforced. Politicians spoke about threats against judges, about the need to protect those who uphold the law. But none of it mattered. One night, the judge vanished. His car was found abandoned on a deserted road. No signs of forced entry, no struggle. The police launched an investigation, but there were no concrete leads. No witnesses. No ransom demand. Just an eerie silence. Days later, his body was found. This wasn't a crime of impulse, nor a robbery gone wrong. The judge had been killed in a methodical, almost ritualistic manner. The authorities tried to keep the details under wraps, but rumors began to circulate. He had been tortured before he died. Precise cuts, as if someone had been testing how much pain a man could endure before finally succumbing. Inside the prison, when the news reached him, the veteran simply smiled. He hadn't laid a finger on the man who had doomed his family. He hadn't dirted his hands, but that didn't mean he wasn't responsible. And now, no one knew who would be next. Inside the prison, he quickly became a legend. He wasn't just another inmate serving his sentence. He wasn't just another criminal, a thief, a con artist, or an impulsive murderer. He was different, and everyone knew it. Respect came naturally. Dangerous men, ruthless killers, gang leaders who ruled over the prison with absolute control, all looked at him with a mixture of admiration and fear. Everyone knew what he had done. It wasn't just the brutal execution of his sister's and mother's murderer. It was what had happened afterward. The fact that, even behind bars, he still had the power to make a judge disappear. That made him someone no one wanted to cross. Unlike other inmates, he didn't seek dominance. He had no interest in forming a gang, challenging the block leaders, or controlling the underground prison economy. He didn't need to. His name was enough. His history spoke for itself. There were criminals in that prison who had killed for drugs, for money, for territory. But he had killed for something that went beyond all that. Vengeance. Justice in the eyes of many. And the fact that he showed not a single ounce of remorse only made him even more terrifying. He never hid, never walked with his head down. He moved through the corridors as if he were still on the battlefield, as if he knew that if it came down to it, he could take down anyone around him without hesitation. The guard knew who he was too. They knew he wasn't an ordinary inmate. They didn't try to provoke him, nor did they test his patience like they did with others. The way they handled him was different. It wasn't openly respectful, but there was a certain level of caution in how they approached him. Once, a new guard, young and arrogant, decided to challenge him. Maybe he wanted to see if the legend was real. Maybe he wanted to show his fellow officers that he wasn't afraid. He walked up to him while the veteran was eating in the mess hall. He made some snide remark, something about how he must regret throwing his life away over vengeance. The veteran simply lifted his gaze and looked at him. It was a cold, empty stare, carrying something no one could quite define, but it froze the young guard's blood instantly. The silence at the table spread throughout the entire mess hall. The other inmates stopped eating. The murmurs died down. Everyone was waiting to see what would happen. The guard hesitated. The veteran just kept looking at him, unmoving. There was no rage, no threat, just an overwhelming presence that made the air around them feel heavier. After a few seconds, the guard turned and walked away, trying to hide his fear. But everyone there knew the truth. In prison, no one respects a weak guard. The other inmates spoke of him in whispers. They said his stare could pierce through a man's soul. They said that when he slept, he didn't have nightmares. Nightmares were afraid of him. There were rumors that once a new inmate, a young guy who didn't yet understand how things worked, tried to challenge him in the yard. The details were unclear, but what everyone knew was that the kid was never the same after that day. He didn't die, nor was he seriously injured, but something inside him changed. As if he had seen something he was never supposed to see, he never looked at the veteran directly again. Neither did anyone else. Despite the admiration and fear he commanded, he never sought power. He didn't need to. If anyone wanted to fight over control inside the prison, they could do it among themselves. He didn't care. His name alone was enough to ensure that no one dared to challenge him. And despite being sentenced to life in prison, despite knowing he would never leave, he never, not even for a second, showed any regret. He never asked for forgiveness, never said he would do anything differently, never tried to justify his actions. He was exactly where he expected to be. And the only certainty within those walls was that if he wanted to, he could still take down anyone. One night, in the prison yard, he decided to talk. It was rare for him to share anything personal. He had always been a man of few words, someone who only spoke when necessary. But that night, maybe out of boredom, maybe because something was weighing on his mind more than usual, he started talking about the war. The stories he told weren't heroic. They weren't the kind you see in war movies, the ones that paint soldiers as noble warriors. No, what he described was something completely different, something dark, something that felt like it hadn't been told many times before. I was there listening, me and a few other inmates who in one way or another had earned some level of closeness with him. But that night, none of us felt lucky to be there, because what he told us was terrifying. He talked about Vietnam, about what it meant to be a tunnel rat. He explained how, on some missions, they had to crawl into tunnels dug by the enemy. Narrow, dark tunnels, infested with rats, snakes, scorpions, and sometimes something worse. He said that, most of the time, he couldn't use a flashlight. He couldn't make a sound. Silence was his only defense. You crawl forward without seeing anything, just feeling the dirt and the walls with your hands, he said. And the whole time, you know there might be someone ahead, waiting. No one said a word. He was staring at the ground as he spoke, but not in a way that made him seem weak. He wasn't regretful, nor nostalgic. It was as if he was reliving it all at that very moment. Once, he had to go into a tunnel where they had heard suspicious noises. It was his job to go first and check. He crawled in, his knife clutched in his hand. The heat and humidity were suffocating. The air was thick, smelling of dirt and sweat. A few meters in, he heard breathing. He knew someone was there, waiting. A Viet Cong soldier was in the same tunnel as him. No room to run, no room to use a firearm. Only one of them was getting out alive. He didn't hesitate. He sensed the enemy's movement and struck. He described how he used his knife to slash the soldier's throat before he could react. But the problem was, in those tunnels, they couldn't just leave the bodies behind. He had to keep crawling, dragging the corpse with him. He talked about how the walls were so narrow that sometimes when he killed someone inside, their blood soaked his clothes, his arms, his skin. I came out of a tunnel once, covered in so much blood that my sergeant thought I had been shot, he said in a neutral tone. But it was all from the other guy. He talked about the screams. Sometimes, he would find hidden compartments in the tunnels where Viet Cong soldiers were waiting. When he attacked, it wasn't always silent. The soldiers on the other side screamed. Sometimes, they suffered. One time, one of them didn't die right away. He cut him deep enough to disable him, but not enough to kill him. The man thrashed on the ground, choking on his own blood. The problem is, if he screamed, more would come, he explained. So I had to make him stop. He didn't need to say how. Everyone understood. There were stories he couldn't even fully tell. Once, while advancing through enemy territory, his platoon came across a village. They were ordered to eliminate any threats. He followed orders. But whatever he saw in that village haunted him for the rest of his life. He didn't go into details, but he made it clear that, in that place, he left a part of himself behind. He didn't take pride in it. He didn't try to justify it. He just said that after that day, he never slept properly again. The worst part wasn't what he did. It was the fact that, at the time, he felt nothing. It was just another day, he said. You do what you have to do, and then you move on. Someone asked if he felt any remorse. He was silent for a long time before answering. He didn't say yes, but he didn't say no either. After that night, no one ever asked him about the war again. Not because he told us not to, but because no one wanted to hear more. Another night, in the same prison yard, he spoke again. But this time, it wasn't about the war. He didn't talk about the tunnels or the men he had killed crawling through the darkness. This time, he spoke about his sister. It was the first time we heard him talk about her in detail. Until then, we all knew she had been murdered. We knew he had avenged her, and we knew that's why he was here. But we had never heard how it happened. We had never heard how he truly felt. That night, he gave us that answer. And what he said was something none of us would ever forget. He started by talking about their childhood. His sister was a few years younger, and he had always been the protective older brother. If someone made her cry, I handled it, he said, staring at the ground, as if seeing something beyond the worn concrete of the prison. Even after growing up, he never lost that instinct. When he left for Vietnam, still young, he promised himself he would come back whole, that he would protect his family as he always had. But when he returned, he realized he had failed. His sister had been trapped in an abusive relationship, and he knew it before he even set foot back home. He had received letters, heard the stories from his family. He tried to convince her to leave the man, wrote to her, telling her to end it. But life doesn't work the way we want. He never imagined things would go as far as they did. He came back expecting to see her, but instead, he found a massacre. He remembered the feeling he had when he saw the police blocking the street, when he heard the neighbors whispering, when he smelled something he recognized all too well. It wasn't a smell you forget. At the station, the detectives explained what had happened, speaking in cold, detached tones. But he could only think that this couldn't be real. But it was. His mother and sister had been brutally murdered by the man his sister had been desperately trying to escape. A coward who couldn't handle rejection and decided to end everything. He said he listened to the details of the crime as if he were hearing a report about a war in some distant land. But this war wasn't in some foreign country. It was his home, and the worst part? The killer was still alive. And soon, he would be free. When he found out the man had been released on bail, it was like something inside him shattered. There was no explosive rage, no outburst, just an absolute certainty, the kind a soldier feels when he receives an order. He knew exactly what he had to do, and so he found him. The man was in a bar, playing pool, drinking, living his life as if nothing had happened. As if he hadn't destroyed an entire family. As if his sister's blood wasn't on his hands. He walked up to him without rushing. Sat nearby, watching him. The murderer didn't recognize him at first. To him, it was just another stranger making small talk. He told him about Vietnam, about the tunnels, about how a man can spend so long in the dark that he starts to see shadows differently. The bastard laughed, and in that moment, he decided it wouldn't be quick. He grabbed the man by the collar and slammed him onto the pool table. The entire bar fell silent. No one stepped in. No one moved. He pulled out his knife, the same kind of knife he used in Vietnam, the same kind he had used on men he had never met, men who were simply on the wrong side of a war. But this time, he knew his victim very well. He looked the man, his sister's murderer, right in the eyes and said calmly, "Now you're going to know what it's like to be in a tunnel, in the dark, alone, knowing that someone is there, waiting to kill you." And then he started cutting. He described the details without rushing, without emotion. It wasn't an act of blind fury. It wasn't an uncontrolled outburst. He knew exactly where to cut, to keep him conscious, to make him feel every second. "I didn't let him die quickly," he said, without looking at us. "I made him feel every moment." He talked about the smell of blood, about the way the man's body trembled, trying to resist, trying to beg, trying to escape the inevitable. And for the first time, he enjoyed killing someone. The war had never made him feel that way. In Vietnam, killing had been a necessity, a cold, mechanical act. He never took satisfaction from it. He never felt anything real, just the emptiness of a soldier following orders. But that night in that bar, it was different. He allowed himself to feel. And at the same time, it was the worst thing he had ever felt. Because after all that pain, after every wound he inflicted, after every scream he silenced, nothing changed. His sister was still dead. And in the end, all he had left was a lifeless body in front of him and an emptiness inside that would never be filled. He said he remembers the moment the police arrived, telling him to stop. He looked at the officers and realized that he was already dead inside. The trial was just a formality. The prison, an inevitable consequence. After a long silence, he looked at us and said something we would never forget. "I'm in prison, but not physically. My cell is in my head." He knew he would never leave that prison. But deep down, he had already been sentenced long before the judge read his verdict. The war had changed him, but losing his sister had destroyed him. And now, he lived in a prison whose door no one could unlock. I never imagined that such a calm and good-natured man could have committed so many atrocities. He didn't seem like someone who had taken dozens of lives, nor someone who carried so many shadows inside him. If you had seen him walking through the prison corridors, you would never have thought that he had killed men in the darkness of Vietnam's tunnels, that he had slowly carved apart his sister's murderer in the middle of a bar, or that his mind was a battlefield he never managed to escape from. He didn't try to impose his presence like other inmates. He didn't need to. The respect he commanded wasn't based on immediate fear, but on the certainty that he was not a man to be trifled with. Yet, unlike gang leaders, the killers who bragged about their crimes, or the thieves who spoke of their heists with pride, he never showed satisfaction in what he had done. He never smiled when telling his stories. He never tried to convince anyone he was a hero. He simply was. And maybe that's what made him unforgettable. The last time I saw him was the day I left prison. I had spent years inside, paying for my own mistakes, and he was one of the few who treated me like a person rather than just another criminal. But when the day came for me to leave, I realized I had no idea what to say to him. I found him in the yard, his usual spot, where he always sat in silence, watching everything, as if time didn't affect him. But time had affected him. He looked older, weaker. His once dark hair was completely white. His face had more wrinkles. But his eyes were the same. I stood there for a moment, waiting for him to say something meaningful, a lesson, a piece of advice. But he just looked at me, gave a faint smile, and murmured, "Take care of your life." And that was it. He didn't ask about my plans, didn't wish me luck, didn't give me some dramatic farewell. Because to him, this wasn't a goodbye. He knew I was leaving, but he was never going to leave that place. And not because of his life sentence. Because his true prison was never those walls. His true prison was inside his mind. And as I turned away and started walking, I had this strange feeling that I would never see him again. Years passed. I rebuilt my life, stayed out of trouble, and left the past behind. But from time to time, his name would come up in conversations with old acquaintances. They said he was weakening, that time had finally taken its toll on him. I don't know exactly when, but I know he died. I don't know if he died alone in his cell, or if some younger inmate tried to challenge him when he no longer had the strength to fight back. But somehow, I always knew he wouldn't have cared. He always said his real prison wasn't the bars or the guards. It was his own mind, and that time could never erase. But there's something I never fully understood. The judge who sentenced him, the one whose name he asked for in court. I always thought that if he had truly wanted, he could have had that judge killed from inside the prison. He had the connections, the influence, but I never knew if he did. The police never found the culprits. There were no leads, no suspects. But deep down I knew it wasn't him. He never had to ask, because the men he fought with in Vietnam called him a brother. They had survived together, killed together, seen hell together. And that kind of bond never fades. They knew that judge was the one who had let his sister's murderer walk free. They knew that was what had truly destroyed the man who once fought beside them. He never requested it, but they knew. And when the time came, they did what they believed was right. Today, it's been many years since I left that prison. Most of the men I knew in there are either dead, still locked up, or were trying to turn their lives around. But out of all of them, he was the one who truly stayed in my memory. Not just because of what he did, but because of how he carried it. I've never known anyone who bore so much weight alone. Many people are haunted by what they've done, but he was haunted by what he lost. It wasn't the war that destroyed him. It was the loss. And even now, after all these years, I sometimes find myself thinking about him, wondering if, at some point, he found peace. If the cell where his mind was trapped finally opened. Or if, until his last breath, he kept crawling through the dark tunnels of his memory, forever lost in a place he could never escape.